She stood at the altar next to the most feared man in New York City, and her ex-boyfriend was sitting in the front row. The same man who, 6 months ago, had sat on her couch and told her he was in love with her sister. Now he was watching her marry his older brother, and the look on his face was not anger, it was not happiness. It was the specific dawning expression of a man realizing, too late, publicly, permanently, exactly what he had thrown away. This story starts at that altar, and then it goes back to show you exactly how she got there, stay. Because every single step of it was her choice. 6 months earlier, Daniel sat on her couch and said 7 words that ended everything. I have feelings for your sister, Claire. He had rehearsed it. She could tell by the way it came out too clean, too structured, like something practiced in a mirror. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She looked at him for 5 full seconds and said, "Get out of my apartment," he tried to explain. She said it again, "Get out." He left. She locked the door, slid down it onto the floor, and sat there in complete silence for a long time. Not because she was broken, because she was deciding something, and when she stood back up, she was already different. The family dinner 3 weeks later was Vanessa's idea. Of course it was. Claire arrived to find Daniel already seated, Vanessa's hand already in his, her mother already pretending nothing had happened. At one point, someone pulled out a phone for a family photo, and Vanessa stepped smoothly between Claire and their mother, not aggressively, not obviously, just effectively, and Claire found herself on the outside edge of the frame, half cut off, smiling at a camera pointed mostly at her sister. Nobody noticed. That was the thing. Nobody even noticed. She drove home alone that night and made a decision that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with clarity. She was done being the edge of someone else's frame. She researched Dominic Hurst for 4 days before she approached him. Not obsessively and strategically. She knew who he was. She knew what he ran. She knew he would be at the Hargrove Foundation Gala on Friday because his name was on the donor wall, and men like Dominic Hurst showed up to things their name was on. She bought a dress that was not what Claire Bennett would have bought 6 months ago. She walked into that gala alone on purpose, and she found him standing near the window, not drinking his drink, exactly where she expected him to be. She crossed the room. She tapped his arm. She said, "You're Dominic Hurst, I'm Claire Bennett. You're Daniel's brother, and he just destroyed my life. I figured at minimum you owe me a conversation." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "That is the most honest introduction I've received in 11 years. He did not look away once. They talked for 40 minutes. She argued that the building going up on 5th Avenue was architecturally dishonest, and his word back to her was precise. And he laughed once, genuinely, the way people laugh when they're surprised into it. When someone pulled him away for something urgent, he looked back at her once from across the room with an expression she filed and did not analyze yet. She went home and did not wait for him to find her number. She already knew his assistant's email. She sent 3 sentences. Claire Bennett. We met tonight. Dinner Tuesday. His reply came at 11 p.m. 1 word. Yes. She put her phone down and smiled at her ceiling. She had made the first move. She had made all the moves. That distinction mattered more than anyone around her would ever understand. Their first dinner was at a small place in the West Village. Halfway through the appetizers, her phone buzzed. Daniel, calling for the 3rd time that week. She turned it face down without looking. Dominic noticed. He said nothing. She said, "My ex keeps calling to tell me he's worried about me. Apparently my choices are his business even after he made his." Dominic said, "What do you tell him?" She said, "I'm working on the perfect sentence." Dominic said, "I find 1 sentence is usually enough. You just have to be willing to mean it completely." She looked at him across the table and understood, in that moment, that this man had never said a word he didn't mean completely in his adult life. She found that more attractive than anything else about him. That was the moment she knew she was in trouble. 6 weeks in, she saw the other side of him. She had stayed late at his apartment when 3 of his men arrived unannounced. She heard them in the hallway, the low, urgent voices, the specific tension of people delivering bad news. She heard Dominic's voice change. Not louder, lower, colder. She heard him say 2 sentences she couldn't make out, and then absolute silence. When he came back into the room, he was perfectly composed, suit straight, face neutral, the Dominic she knew, but she had heard the other one. She sat very still. He looked at her and said, "You heard that?" Not a question. She said, "Yes." He said, "Are you afraid of me?" She thought about it honestly. She said, "No. But I understand you now in a way. I didn't 10 minutes ago." He looked at her for a long time. Then, "Most people run at this point," she said. "I'm not most people," he said. "No, you are genuinely not." Something settled in the room after that. Heavier, more real, and somehow more solid than anything before it. Daniel called on a Wednesday and finally said the quiet part out loud. He said he was concerned. She said, "About what specifically?" He said, "About you. About your decisions. About who you're spending time with." She said, "Daniel, you sat on my couch and told me you were in love with my sister. You don't have a seat at the table of my decisions anymore." He said she was being reckless. She said, "You left me for Vanessa. Dominic chose me on purpose." Those two things are not the same, and I think you know that. Silence. Then, "Claire," she said, "you didn't leave me for her, Daniel. You left me for a version of yourself that doesn't exist. Good luck finding him." She ended the call. Maya, sitting across from her, put down her coffee and said, "I need that framed." Claire said, "I've been saving it for 6 months." The proposal happened on a Sunday morning. No restaurant, no speech. Dominic was making coffee. She was reading at his counter. And he said without turning around, "I want to marry you." She looked up. He turned around. She said, "That's not a question." Said, "No, it isn't." She closed her book. She looked at the man who had laughed at her honesty the first night, who had not flinched when she saw his darkness, who had chosen her actively, deliberately, without hesitation, when the easiest thing would have been to keep his distance. She said, "Yes." Not because she had run out of reasons to say no, because she had run out of reasons to wait. Vanessa called within the hour. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Vanessa said, "He's dangerous." Claire said, "I know what he is." Vanessa said, "Daniel is worried." Claire said, "Daniel's worry is not my responsibility." Vanessa said, "Don't you think this is all moving a little fast?" And Claire said, calmly, with the specific precision of someone who has been waiting months to say exactly this, "Vanessa, you moved fast. You moved into my relationship while I was still in it. So I need you to hear me clearly.